Hi everyone, hope you're doing all right, hope you're keeping safe, hope you're keeping sane. Merry Christmas to you all, and thank you very much for joining me today. A bit of an important one today really. I want to talk about willpower. Willpower is a fundamental part of any gambling recovery. In fact, it's a fundamental part of any recovery from any addiction, or indeed any commitment to self-improvement or improving your life in some way. Willpower is basically that drive, that mental strength, that mental resolve that you will do something for your own good. You will stop doing something, in our case, or that you will continue to do something that you've started because it's going to improve your life or improve your family's life in some way. If willpower was 100% effective all the time we try and use it, then the very first time that we woke up on the morning after a heavy gambling loss with that knot in our stomach and that gambling hangover, and we committed to ourselves that I'm never doing this again, then we'd never do that again. But we know that's fundamentally flawed. I said in a previous video about myself that if I had £1 for every time I told myself never again, then I wouldn't have any gambling debts, but alas, I do. Now, in order to understand my perspective on willpower, I'd first like to sort of determine the importance of gambling recovery. Of course, I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure if you're a gambling addict or a compulsive gambler or have a problem with gambling, then your experience may be very similar. Quitting gambling and being in gambling recovery has made the biggest positive change to my life of anything I've ever done. I can honestly, hand on heart, say that this is the most important thing I have ever done, not just for me, but for my family, for those around me. So, if we can cement that, even if not the most important, which I believe it will be, but it is a substantially important step to take. It's a substantial point, milestone in your life to improve your life going forward, then we can kind of see the weight and the risk involved in getting into recovery and why it's so important. And with that in mind, why would we want to take any risks on it? Why would we want to make this harder and more likely to fail than is entirely necessary? And I believe that if you are committing to quitting gambling through willpower alone, then you are setting yourself up consciously or subconsciously, or dare I say deliberately, for a fail. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But just let's have a look at this from an alternative angle. Once or twice a year, there's always these sort of month-long challenges, isn't there? Things like Stoptober or Dry January, something like that, where people are actively encouraged to give up one of their vices, normally drinking or smoking or something like that, for a month, and often there's a sort of charity element or whatever. But fundamentally, it's a personal challenge. It's something done to maybe improve your health while raising some money for a good cause. And that's fine. The basis of these challenges is exactly that. It is a challenge. It is a test to your mental strength. It is a test to your willpower that you will avoid for the sake of an arbitrary month. You will avoid doing something that you enjoy, notably going for a pint or having a cigarette or whatever. You wouldn't find an alcoholic using Dry January as a reason to get on the wagon. The reason being is because it's a challenge. If you fail in Dry January, what's the worst that happens? Or you might get ribbed by a few people, you might have to dip your hand in your pocket to make up the charity donation. But nothing ultimately bad is ever going to happen. You wouldn't do that for gambling though, would you? You wouldn't say, right, for a month I'm not going to gamble, and then rely entirely on willpower as a challenge to yourself, because it's more important than that. Climbing a mountain is a challenge. I've climbed a few mountains in my life. Look at me, go me. Okay, but I climb it to get to the top as a challenge. There's nothing at the top of that mountain except maybe a little pat on the back for myself. But I will choose difficult paths up that mountain. I've done the miners track at Snowdon, which was a particularly hard climb. But the reason I did it was for the challenge, to push myself to do something that I didn't know whether I could do or not. Now, if there was actually something at the top of that mountain, something that I needed, something that I wanted, say I was terminally ill and the cure for whatever condition I had was there at the top of that mountain, would I challenge myself to do it in a more difficult way than I had to? No, I wouldn't. I'd charter a helicopter and I'd be up there as quickly as I can be. So if we think of gambling addiction and we think of the summit of that mountain as, basically all the things we want to get from our recovery, basically getting our life back. If our life, our relationships, our future happiness and our future finances are all sat at the top of that mountain, we're not going to go, I bet I can't do this the hard way. You'll get up there the easiest, quickest and most effective way possible, the way that has the lowest chance of failure. So whilst willpower is important, it can be relying on willpower alone to quit gambling is effectively taking a difficult and flawed path with a high chance of failure rate to something that's so important. Don't treat this as a challenge to yourself. There is no certificate, there is no medal for quitting gambling the hard way using only willpower alone. Why would you do that to yourself? Willpower is effective. It's very effective at plugging gaps. I've spoken many times about different blocks and different methods and strategies that we can use to prevent ourselves from gambling, to actively stop ourselves from being able to gamble. Willpower is very useful to plug the little gaps in between these blocks, because ultimately nothing is watertight, and willpower helps bridge the gap. A lot of these blocks will only buy us time and thinking space, and make gambling very hard for us, but not often will it make it impossible. So we need to use that little bit of willpower as an ongoing thing. But why would we want to try and use that little bit of willpower and extend that to cover the whole addiction? It's not strong enough for the vast majority of people. There'll always be a bloke in the pub who told you he used to smoke 60 a day and then just quit on a whim, without using patches or gum or anything else or hypnosis or whatever. Then, well, good luck to you. But he hasn't got a medal, has he? And he had a much higher chance of failure. And with something that's that serious, as we agreed at the top end of this video, that quitting gambling is such an important step in your life, don't rely on willpower, because there's no accolade. There's nothing waiting for you at the end of it just because you've done it the hard way. My experience of recovery, when I finally did something about it, when I finally wanted to quit and really wanted to put this in motion, was that I did all the blocks. I spoke to everyone. I did the self-exclusions. I did the GamStop thing. I spoke to my wife. I got into counselling. I did everything that was possible to help supplement my willpower. Now, as my recovery's gone on and it's been longer and longer since I last gambled, the urges have become more infrequent. They've become less severe. And feasibly, now maybe, I still have all the blocks in place, but feasibly willpower might just be enough to cover the majority of those urges. But it never would have been enough in the early days. So why flip that on its head? Why rely on one of the most sort of flawed tools at our disposal at the front end of a recovery when the urges are going to be most frequent and most strong and the chance of failure is at its highest? Well, dare I be brave and suggest that one of the reasons we often rely on willpower in the early stages of our recovery is because we know it has such a high failure rate. I know for a fact that I have told myself many times in the past that I don't want to gamble anymore, but not actually meant it. What I've wanted to do is stop losing, or what I thought I needed to do was take a break from gambling. However, I would have told myself to stop many times before I actually wanted to, and by relying on willpower alone and not implementing any of the other proven strategies for abstinence and from gambling recovery, what I've done is I've left that door ajar. I know that quitting gambling on willpower alone is likely to fail. So I haven't therefore committed to a life without gambling, which at the time would have been a life that I couldn't envisage. So by setting myself up for failure, the only person that's going to stop me from gambling is me. I get a temporary positive hit in my brain, a temporary bit of dopamine because I've made that commitment. But I know that I haven't really committed. If I actually went out of my way to put blocks in place and self-exclusion and GamStop and change my bank card and talk to my wife and get some counselling and all those sort of other things that make an actual fundamental practical difference to your recovery, then a lot of them are a lot harder to undo than having just said to yourself, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is why I said in a previous video, much like using Stoptober to stop drinking if you're an alcoholic, setting something like the new year as an arbitrary date to quit gambling is fundamentally flawed, because you're treating it like a challenge and you're not treating it with the respect and with the seriousness that it deserves. This isn't some fleeting transient thing we can do and then pat ourselves on the back because we did it for a week. This is a fundamental change in life. And don't take me wrong, I think sometimes we put too much importance, we give too much power over to gambling. We think of it as this almighty presence in our lives, and actually it's only once it starts edging out of our lives that we realise that it was fairly insignificant, although the effects of it can be anything but insignificant. I hope this makes sense, and like I say, I'm not belittling anyone who is using willpower to stop gambling. Good luck, but get some other blocks and stuff in place, because no one is at the end of this with a medal and to congratulate you for doing it the hard way. This is not about a challenge. This is not about looking back on it and going, oh, didn't I do well? This is about getting to a point where you're not gambling. That is the only brief with recovery, getting to a point where you're not gambling and maintaining that. And if there are things we can do and steps we can take and strategies we can put in place to make this not necessarily easier but less likely to fail, then do that. And don't rely on a strategy with an incredibly high failure rate, unless of course you want to fail. And if that's the case, maybe ask yourself, are you actually ready to stop gambling? And that's a topic for another day. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.